Hi homesteaders, my name is Melissa with Gullion Homestead and welcome to my channel where I focus on homesteading skills, self-sufficiency, and resilience. If you're new to my channel, please like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. So today I'm going to talk all about my onions. We're going to do some preserving of my onions, and this has been kind of a frustrating gardening year for me. I shared a little bit on my channel about probably a few weeks ago, the beginning of July, about what's going on in my garden, how I'm struggling with some, I was struggling with my onions, but also with some of my tomatoes. I'm having a really good year for green beans, so that's great. And it looks like we're going to have a good sweet potato year and maybe a good melon year, and we had a great garlic year. So that's a good thing, but some other things that I've done have been very frustrating. So I first want to talk to you about what I did this year with my onions. So I decided to grow onions from plants. I purchased them from an online vendor who was a pretty reputable vendor. And I did that instead of onion sets. I did some research. It really seemed like you could get larger onions from the onion plants. And so that's why I went that route. But I want to show you that this is about the size of most of my onions. They're not very big at all, and a lot of them have already started to go bad on me. They're rotting out in my garage. I have let them sit out there for about 2 to 3 weeks. They're nice and cured now. They were curing out there, and I went out there to check them because I was thinking about doing some preserving or stringing up my onions to keep for winter, because online, when I checked out this type of onion, the red and the yellow onions I bought were actually tested to last up to a year in like a good storage environment. So that would be like cold storage. That was my plan. Well, it is July. I pulled them out 2 weeks ago and half of them have already gone bad. So this did not work for me this year. So I've decided that what I was going to do, I'm going to toss those back in my compost. I don't really compost a whole lot, but I do have a pile behind. I have a tree line behind my property, and I do throw some stuff in there and just let it, compost naturally into the ground. And I do that all the time because I want to encourage good growth back there in my tree line. So I'm just going to toss those back there. And this is what I have right now is I have these red onions that are at least in decent shape. You can see even some of them were really small. So what I decided to do is I looked up in my Ball Home Preserving book, and there is a great recipe in there for preserving red onions. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, normally I would order my red wine vinegar from Azure Standard, but I don't have time for that. So I ran down to Aldi's and got some their red wine vinegar that they had on their shelf. They only had 2 available. I had one in my pantry, and so they did have one white wine vinegar. The recipe calls for red wine vinegar, but I'm just going to go ahead and use the white wine vinegar to throw in with the red wine vinegar as well. And so we're going to go ahead and get going on these onions. I'm going to pull the book out, and we're going to follow the instructions, and we're going to do this together. The other thing I'm going to share with you today is a new canning lid that I'm using that I am loving, and I'm going to show you the whole process from start to finish on how to can with the Tattler canning lids. So we will be right back. Let's grab that book and get moving on this project. Okay, so I have this awesome Ball complete book of home preservation or home preserving. I actually had a smaller one I've used for years, but I've seen that a lot of people use this book, and so I went ahead and ordered that last season, and I'm using it a lot more this season. I have tabbed all the things that I'm going to do this season. And one of them is, I already had this actually on my radar. I was going to try to hang some red onions for winter cooking. And I was already planning on doing some red onions in vinegar. And this is a great thing that you can use on burgers, on salads, on really tacos. There's all kinds of things you can use this for. And the great thing is that it will be preserved in a pickling brine in your pantry, and it'll be good for a long time. So it'd be good for a couple of years if you decide. Really, anything that you put in a canner will last for years. So we have all kinds of things that we actually have canned. Last year, I canned some things that I haven't even started using yet. Happens all the time to me. So I probably will not grow red onions again, because I would imagine whatever we get out of here will be enough for Steve and I for a couple of years, because honestly, Steve and I don't really necessarily eat a 3-course meal. Sometimes we don't even eat a side dish with our main dish. So this will be just a great thing to add to burgers, tacos. I'm thinking it's going to be a great salad topper, just like a dressing, because it's going to be in a red wine vinegar. So it looks like if you follow the recipe, we are going to peel our onions and slice them up. Now you could slice them, or you could put them in the food processor and chop them up. I'm thinking I'm probably going to, I think I have a slicer attachment, but my eyes are going to kill me if I try to do all of this manually. So I think what I'll do is cut and peel the onions, see what onions I have good here, and then we'll try to slice them in the food processor. So let's get going on that now. Now, as I'm peeling this, I can see that the top of this is really mushy, and I'm not really sure why. I've actually never grown a red onion before. Last year, we grew yellow onions, and then we bought some yellow onions from a local supplier. That local person, let me just slice this and see what's going on with it. Yeah, it's kind of a little rotten in the middle. So I think what I'll do, I'm going to cut these. I'm just going to cut the bad part off and just leave the good part of the onion. So we'll toss that in the trash. But last year what happened, and this one's a little soft too. I'm not sure if like I overwatered these. I'm not really sure what happened, but yep, that onion's no good. We might end up with just a small batch of these onions, but regardless, I do have some that are good. I know I do, because I actually have already checked some of them. But last year we ordered onions from the farmer's market, from a local producer and a local farmer, and they did not last us past like November. And when I ordered them, my plan was to have them all year, all winter. So about November or December, they started to go bad. So Steve and I actually just peeled them and cut them all up and froze them. And I only have like 2 little baggies left, but that's one thing that you can do with your onions if your onions start to go bad. And so that's what we did last year, because I was not going to throw any food away. I just have a really hard time throwing any food away. So I went ahead last year and froze all of these, and then froze all my onions, and then just pulled them out as I needed to use them. It's actually kind of a great way to do that, because they're already chopped up and they're already prepared, and you can just throw them frozen into whatever dish that you're making, and it's perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and we'll be back here shortly and start the next process in preserving our red onions from the garden. Okay, my friends, so I've got my canner out. Let's look. I didn't really get that many onions. I'm hoping I have enough to do a batch. I'm a little sad by this, but this is just part of gardening. Some years are better than other years. And I will tell you that when I grew my onions, I grew them inside of a arch trellis and also in front of my string trellis with my tomatoes. My inside of my bean trellis, the arch trellis, they didn't do very well. I'm thinking it's because they didn't get enough sun. So I do have a plan for next year where I have, if you've seen my garden before, I had a string trellis going down this way, part of a string trellis, part of another arch trellis going down, and all this empty space in between that I tried to grow cauliflower that did not take this year. And so my thought is next year, I'm just going to put onions all the way down the middle of that. I need to make sure that the companion planting is good. And then maybe if they get more sun, we'll get some bigger onions. But I'm also thinking I'm just going to do yellow onions next year, because I would say my yellow onions turned out better than my red onions. So just a piece of information I wanted to share with you guys. All right, so we're going to pull out the recipe for the red onions. My problem is I have too many things bookmarked to make. That is always a problem for me. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up my canner with hot water. This is my hot water bath canner. I have a tray inside here because you do not want your jars to sit on the bottom of this because of the heat. You actually could rupture your jars. So what I normally do is throw some regular vinegar in with this because we have hard water, and I throw water in here. I stick it on the stove and let it start cooking or let it start heating up. So let's go ahead and get started on that now. I put the vinegar in there to prevent hard water deposits on the outside of my canning jars. So let's go ahead and get going on that. So I'm literally just going to throw like half a cup or so, maybe it's a cup, I don't know. I just splashed some regular white vinegar inside my canning jar. And then I'm going to throw about 2 gallons of water to start. It really will depend on how many jars I get in here, but I can always add more water if I need. When you're water bath canning, you want to make sure that the water is covering your jars about 1 inch above where your lids are. But you don't want to fill your water bath canner with water all the way to the top, because obviously when you put your jars in, it's going to overflow and you're going to have a hot mess. So I normally start with about 2 gallons of water, and then I can always add more. It's always easier to add more than it is to take away. So we're going to go ahead and get this on the stove and get it moving, get it going. And I'm just going to put it on high, let it heat up, and then we're going to throw our jars in there here shortly. I think if I have enough jelly jars, I would just like to do jelly jars because it's just Steve and I, and really I do a lot of things in jelly jars. I do sauces in jelly jars, jalapenos in jelly jars, because if not, I'm afraid that it's going to go to waste. It sticks in the refrigerator. Sometimes we forget to use it. So I love to can most of my condiments in jelly jars, which are half pints. So let me grab those and we'll get going on the next part of this recipe. Okay guys, I'm running a little bit low on my jelly jars, but I do have these are very old canning jars that I have that I don't know where I picked them up. I probably picked them up at a consignment store or something because I love old looking jars. And I always make sure that I wash my jars out with some soap and water. I just do a real quick rinse because normally I run these through the dishwasher when I'm done and then put them in storage. So I'll do that. And then I'm going to stick those inside my canner. Now, one of the reasons that I'm doing this video, or I started to do this homesteading channel, is I have lots of friends that have asked me before if I could teach them how to can. And the problem is that my schedule never works with anybody else's schedule. And so it just seemed like a better idea just to go ahead and get this on video. And that's kind of how I started my homesteading channel. I decided that this would be a great way to share with my friends and family members who wanted to learn to can. I pretty much taught myself to can myself. I have been canning, water bath canning I've been doing for most of my adult life, but started pressure canning about, I don't know, in the past 5 years, and I love pressure canning as well. But there's a ton of things that you can hot water bath can. It's crazy. So this is one of the things that you can hot water bath can, and you only have to can this for 10 minutes, which is fantastic. Now I decided that I thought I was going to use my food processor, but sometimes just getting my food processor out is just more work. These weren't really burning my eyes too much when I actually was peeling them. So I'm going to go ahead and take a chance and hopefully won't cry on camera, but I'm just going to slice up my onions here. And the recipe calls for, and you need to be careful because, of course, I have to be careful because I am notorious for cutting myself in the kitchen. But I wanted to make sure that I do this correctly. So you're supposed to do about 1/4 of an inch, and you need 10 cups for this recipe. Now, if I don't have 10 cups for this recipe of onions, I'm going to go ahead and make the brine for what it calls for 10 cups. So I make sure I get everything like the right proportion. And then if I don't get to use all the brine, that's fine as well. What I might end up doing is just putting the brine in the refrigerator. And then if I think that it might be good to do this with my other onions, I might do that too. But let's get a measuring cup out so that we can measure this up. So I'll just stick this basket here so that we can actually do, we can add these. This is a 4-cup measuring dish, and I might be surprised, I might get more. It says right here that if you do 10 cups of peeled and sliced onions, you'll get 7 8-ounce jars of this, which I don't have that many jars actually prepared. So if that happens, well, I guess we'll deal with it as it comes. Guess that's what we'll do. Now you're going to want to make sure if you have any bad parts to your onion, you're going to want to make sure you cut that off. Because remember, we are canning this for long-term storage in our pantry so that you can pull it out a year or 2 from now, even if you want to. And you want that to taste fresh, and you want it to be fresh. You don't want it to go bad, and you don't want any bad areas of your onion or whatever it is you're canning to affect other parts of your produce that you're canning. So you don't want to get a bad taste and then ruin that whole jar for sure. So we might get to 10 cups because I'm almost to 4 already, and I'm not quite through half of my onions. So now I'm going to be using a Tattler lid today, and I'm excited to show you guys. I have wanted to purchase Tattler lids and use Tattler lids for a long time. Tattler lids are a reusable lid. It comes with a silicone ring, and they are really quite fabulous. I'm going to share a link with you in the description today so that you can purchase these if you like. It is an affiliate link, just so you know, but the nice thing about these lids is if you purchase them kind of the right way, which is the way I just purchased them. If you purchase them, 3 boxes of the regular lids and 3 boxes of the wide mouth lids, you can get these lids for $1 a piece. Now let me talk to you a little bit about what that looks like. Why would you want to purchase a lid that is $1 a piece? Well, the reason for that is because Tattler lids only end up costing you about 10 cents a piece. 10 cents a piece when you use these lids. And this is why. Tattler lids are reusable and can be used up to 10 times or for 10 years of use. And if your rubber seal starts to give out, you just buy new rubber seals and you can reuse the lids. So they're reusable lids, which is fabulous. When I priced out the lids that I was buying off of Amazon or a ball lid, they are at least 33 cents a piece per use. I've gotten my cost down to at least 10 cents, if not less, depending on how many times I actually use them. So if I would use them more than 10 times, obviously I would be saving a lot more money. So I decided to go with Tattler lids. It is also made in the United States, and that's another piece of the puzzle that I just love, is that they're made in the United States. And I am all about, on this channel, self-sufficiency and resilience. What I am trying to show here is that you don't need to depend on someone else all the time to actually be self-sufficient in your kitchen or in your home. One of the ways to do that is growing your own food, of course. saving seeds so that you're not dependent on getting seed from somebody else once you get started, canning your own food and preserving your own food. And in doing that, you would want to have that stuff in stock all the time. And there was a time, especially around COVID, when you could not get some of this stuff in stock. It was running out like crazy because, of course, everybody decided they were going to finally start gardening and they were going to start preserving. So if you have enough of these Tattler lids, now this is going to take some time to build up in my kitchen. I'm prepared for that. But I basically have run out of all of my other lids and I'm replacing them now with Tattler lids. But basically what I'm working towards is having enough lids in my pantry, my backstock of my pantry, so that I have enough lids to go with all of my jars. If that makes sense. So, and that, you know, that takes some work because we really don't buy very much from the store. I did buy some mushrooms the other day that were canned just because I have not started growing my own mushrooms yet, but that is a plan of mine. But if you're growing most of your own food and most of your food in your pantry are jars, ball jars, you're going to need a backup of lids and rings to actually complete your canning. So just a little something that I'm working on here in my kitchen. Okay, I was trying not to cut my finger off right there. So we've already have 8 cups. I've got about 5 small onions left right here. I'm going to probably be able to get out, we're about 1 cup, so I think we'll be able to get our 10 cups. So I am going to have to pull myself out some more canning jars for this project. All right, guys, we got 10 cups of onions, all sliced up, red onions, ready to go into our canning jars. Let's look at the next process before I pull out some more canning jars and see what we need to do next. So now it says we are, we get to use fresh garlic. I love to use fresh garlic, and we are going to have some garlic out of our garden. Let me pull some out of the bowl over here because we've been using garlic all week in the cooking. So if you've not experienced this little gadget, this thing is wonderful. It just actually, you stick your garlic in there and you just basically do this after your garlic is cured, and the peeling comes right off. You cannot beat that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this smaller pot. I'm going to throw in my garlic clove. And then this calls for 4 cups of red wine vinegar, which is 2 of these bottles. That's why I had to go get more of these. So I'm just going to put 2 of these. Oh, I was thinking that was going to take a while to empty. We're going to do 2 of those, and then we are going to mix in. We're going to bring this to a boil over medium heat. So I'm going to let this cook first. It says combine vinegar and garlic, bring to a boil over medium heat, reduce heat, and boil gently for 5 minutes until the garlic flavor has infused in this liquid. So that's what we're doing. And then we're going to add, 4 cups of red wine vinegar and the garlic. We're going to cook that over medium heat. What we're doing is letting that garlic infuse, and so you're going to get some garlic taste in your red wine vinegar. That's going to be fabulous. And I think I already said this, but I had to go down to Aldi because I needed to get these onions preserved today, and I didn't have time to order any red wine vinegar from Azure Standard. I had one of these in the pantry that I had picked up at some point just so I would have it for a backup, because sometimes I do need it for canning. And, well, when I went to do my last Azure Standard order, I didn't really think about the fact that I was going to need some more red wine vinegar. So I am not going to get another Azure Standard order for like another 2.5 weeks. So I can't wait. I couldn't wait on that because some of my onions started going bad, and I wanted to make sure I got these canned up today because I do not like to lose any of my food in my garden. So when things start to go south, I'm actually all about getting it in cans and in my pantry as soon as possible. All right, so we're going to throw this on the stove and let this cook down here we're going to boil it on medium heat. When it comes to a boil, I'm going to reduce the heat and then let it gently cook for another 5 minutes. And then we'll come back and add, it looks like next we're going to add the onions to that. So we'll come back here in a few minutes, add the onions. Meanwhile, I'm going to go find some more canning jars. We'll be back shortly. Okay, so I got some more canning jars into my canner. They're heating up. I washed them up. I've got a couple of different sizes, which I really like to have several different sizes because there are some times, like I said, it's just Steve and I in this house, but there are some times when we have, I just found one more onion, might as well cut it up. There are some times when we have family over and we need more of that, and there's sometimes when it's just the two of us, and then there's other times when I like to give it away as gifts. So it's kind of nice to have multiple sizes of, we do that with jams, jellies, ketchup, everything that I preserve, I actually do in all kinds of different size jars. Now, why would I put, for those of you that are new to canning, why would I put my jars into the canner and let them heat up like I'm doing right now when I am not really ready to can my stuff? The reason for that is that you don't want to put a cold jar into a hot water bath, obviously, because it will crack. And if it cracks, then you've lost everything that you just worked so hard for. So it's really kind of good to put it in there when the water starts up, is boiling, and so that you have nice, hot, sterile jars. You don't necessarily have to sterilize your lids anymore. They actually don't even consider that that you have to do that for safe practice. I just typically wash mine with soapy water and put them on there, and I've never had any issues. Some people continue to sterilize or to boil them down into some water, their lids, because that's just the practice they're used to. I did it for a long time, and just recently I found out it's really not even really suggested anymore. So it's just one less step for me to do, so I just don't do it anymore. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to break my onions into rings, because obviously I want these to be rings. And if it's solid, it might not actually. It's really important for you to follow the instructions in the canning book, because there's safe practices for canning. There are some things that are not safe to can because the heat can't like penetrate through whatever it is that you're processing. For instance, you can safely can hamburger, but you have to fry it up before you can it. It's okay to can stewed beef cut into chunks raw, or chicken raw, because it will do fine in a pressure canner. But because the density of ground beef, you really need to ground that up first. So this recipe specifically calls for onion rings. So I sliced the onions the way I was supposed to, and now I'm just pulling them apart in rings and doing what it says to do for my jars. I'm really excited to have this in my pantry. I've never had any vinegar onions in my pantry before, and I personally love onions. I love them on my hamburgers. So this is just going to be a taste of summer this winter when I cook us a hamburger over here on the stove. And I just want to do sometimes we'll do a bacon onion tomato jam. That's another great thing that I love. Now I can't can that, but I do make a big batch of that and then freeze it and then just pull it out in the winter time when we make burgers. Oh my gosh, it's so good. It's also really good to put over meatloaf as well. So that is just another lovely, lovely thing that I like to make. I typically don't make it in the summer. Very seldom. I typically make it in the winter time, and then whatever's left over, I just put in the freezer. And normally I have 3 or 4 jars in the freezer to use throughout the winter. So I'm going to dump these out just because I can't really get to all of them and I want to ring them up. So my garlic is infusing and my red wine vinegar right now. It is boiling, so I turned it down just a little bit. I'm going to let that cook for another 5 minutes. And then let's look and see what the rest of the recipe calls for. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're just going to next we're going to add our onion rings to our liquid and let that cook down. Now there's a lot of recipes out there that say you can raw pack. This apparently is not one of them. I've never made this before. But the other thing about this is when you cook down your vegetables before you put them in the jars, you actually lose less space. A lot of raw pack recipes like green beans, when you actually put them in the jar and then you process them, when they come out of the pressure canner, you lose a lot of space in your jar. So I normally am packing my stuff in pretty tightly. So I'm pretty pumped that this is not a raw pack, even though I love raw pack because it's so easy. It's so very, very easy. But this is going to cook the onions down just a little bit. We're also going to be using some pickling salt, which will actually keep these from getting too mushy. And so let's look at the process for the pickling salt. Now I buy my pickling salt. I can also put a link for that as well. I buy my pickling salt from Amazon in bulk. And it looks like what we're going to do here is, so we're going to, once we put it in the jar, then we're going to add pickle crisp or pickling salt to our jar before we put it in the canner. So we're in good shape right now. I was thinking that's probably what the process was, but I've not done a ton of pickling this year. I did some mustard pickles. They're fabulous. And so I just planted some more. I had some tomato. I have had a horrible tomato year. I had disease. I had a virus hit several of my tomatoes. I had a really bad blight hit my tomatoes. We started out with 9 tomatoes. We're down to 3 tomato plants. So not too happy, but thank goodness for me, I have still a ton of tomatoes up in my cabinet here, canned from last year. So that's why when I have a good harvest, I can everything that I have. I don't throw anything away. So this year, we're probably going to end up with another 40 jars of green beans. And we never go through 40 jars of green beans, but it's okay. I am always going to can what we have to make sure that we have enough in case we have a bad harvest one year. So this has been a bad tomato year, but the good thing about that is that I had space to plant some more pickling cucumbers. And so that is what I did. They're starting to come up. They're just starting to germinate. We still have about 10 weeks left in our growing season. I should have plenty of time to get some more pickling cucumbers. And then I will do all of my pickling cucumbers this year. We'll not plant those next year, and we'll just hope for a better tomato harvest next year. So the other thing that I did about a week ago is I planted some more spaghetti squash, because my spaghetti squash got hit by a squash vine borer and I lost it. And so I planted actually 3 spaghetti squash because I love spaghetti squash. We eat it all winter long. I don't want to spend $4 or $5 on spaghetti squash at the grocery store. So I planted 3 plants so that I could make sure that we got plenty of spaghetti squash. I can always give it away if I need to, but I would, again, I just was trying to protect myself since we already got hit by the squash vine borer. I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of squash in the garden, or plenty of plants to give us the squash we need. Last year I had the same thing happen, and we only ended up with 1 or 2 squash, which was no fun at all. We don't eat a lot of pasta in our house, but we do eat spaghetti squash. All right, I got all of my rings. Throw these. I'm going to throw these in my pot. And it looks like we're going to let these cook down to, we're going to let these cook, we're going to cover these and let these cook down another 5 minutes. Once these come to a boil, we'll cook these 5 minutes, and then we'll be ready to put these in the jars. I'm going to go ahead and get that going. When we come back, we'll be stuffing jars with our pickling onions, our pickling salt, our onions, and our brine. Okay, so all of my jars have been in my hot water bath canner for quite a while. They're nice and hot, so I'm going to pull them out and get them all ready here to fill prior to the canning process. So as you can see, if you've never canned before, these are very hot, and so you're going to want to use a jar lifter, which you can typically purchase at any place that you can get canning supplies. Walmart carries it. You can also get that on Amazon and or in any like kit that you purchase to actually a water bath can. When I bought this water bath canner years ago, it came with one of these jar lifters, and my jar lifter broke and I had to get another one at like Walmart or someplace. So they're not very expensive, but they're pretty valuable when you're using either a water bath canner or a pressure canner. Okay, I'm pulling my cooked onions and brine off of the stove and setting it close to my canning jars just to make filling the jars easier. I also have now a jar filler that just kind of helps to prevent from any spillage. And I also just use a spoon or a ladle to actually ladle items into my jars. I do this when I pressure can or when I water bath can. I use it for pretty much everything that I pour into the jars. It just makes for easy filling. Okay, here I'm just finishing up and I'm adding some liquid because you're going to want to top this off with the brine and make sure that you have a 1/2 inch headspace. And that is actually this, if you don't know what that is, that's the space from the top of the rim of your jar to where your liquid stops. There are special measuring tools for this, but I have canned for so long, I actually can eye what 1/2 inch or what 1/4 inch or what 1 inch is based on the ring on my canning jars. Here I'm just taking a plastic tool and I'm just basically checking for any air bubbles, because if you have air bubbles or air pockets in your canning jars, you will not get a good seal. So I just stick that kind of on the sides there just to make sure that there's no air pockets that need to be released before placing the canning jars on here. So now we're getting ready to work with the Tattler lids. Prior to this, you put a 1/16 of a teaspoon, it's barely any, in each of your canning jars of pickling salt. This is a canning and pickling salt that I purchased off Amazon. I will put a link in the description below for you guys as well if you want to buy this. I bought this last year at the end of the season because I knew I was going to do some pickling this year, and I didn't even open it until this season, but I wanted to make sure I had it in stock. I bought it in bulk. This will probably last me for 5 or 6 years because it is a lot of salt. But the great thing about that is that salt doesn't go bad, so it stays good in your pantry as long as you keep that bag sealed. Okay, prior to adding any canning lid, regardless if it is a regular metal lid or a Tattler lid, you are going to want to make sure that you have no residual salt, brine, anything on the edges of your glass jars. And by doing this, you can wipe it with just a wet cloth. I choose to wipe it with white vinegar. It typically gets any of the stickiness off of the rings or the rims of the glass just to make sure you get a good seal. Here I'm also just checking to make sure I don't have any stickiness there, and then also making sure there's no chips, which I probably should have checked before I filled the jars, but it's good just to make sure you don't have any chips around the edges because you want to be able to get a good seal. So this is the Tattler lid. It is a plastic lid that comes with a rubber gasket. You basically just put that rubber gasket right there on that lid and place it on top of your jar. These are washable. They're made in the United States. Those rubber gaskets are the only thing you will ever need to replace. Typically, these last up to 10 years or longer, and they are fabulous. They seal great. There's a little bit of a learning curve at first, but it does not pop, so you're not going to hear a popping noise, and you don't have any way to actually pop the center down to know for sure if you've got a good seal. But once you take your rings off after you let your jars cool, it's obvious that they've sealed, because if you pick them up from the lid area, it stays on the jar, and that's how you know that it is sealed. If it does not do that, then you need to reprocess your jars. So if you don't know, you can reprocess your jars within 24 hours. If I have jars that do not process and I let them sit for 12 hours or so and then the lids don't seal, I immediately just put them right back in the canner, and typically I can get them to seal. So here you're just going to, normally you would put your ring finger tight. I put them just a tiny bit tighter because I find with the Tattler lids, you are going to want to make sure that that lid is a little bit tighter than a normal lid. Now, you don't want to crank that down because it does need to be able to release some steam, and that's how you get a good seal. So it's kind of something you have to play around with at first, but it's really quite easy once you figure that out. Okay guys, we're getting super close now. Now I'm going to take my jar lifter and I'm just going to place my jars back into my canner. I do need to add a little bit more water to my canner to make sure that I have coverage over my jars. Just as a reminder, you're going to want your water to be covering your jars at least an inch. Okay, here I'm covering my canner. I'm going to let this come to a boil, and I check it just to make sure I've got a good boil. Once you have a rolling boil, you're going to want to process this for 10 minutes. So set a timer for 10 minutes. And then once that 10 minutes is done, you can actually remove the lid, let it sit for 5 minutes with the lid off. And then here I'm pulling my jars out. They have completely processed, and I have a batch of vinegar red onions ready for my pantry. So just a few notes here. I usually wait 12 hours before I take these rings off. Some people just wait overnight, but I like to wait a good 12 hours. I find that way I know that the jars seal really well. You are going to want to take your rings off because it's not good to store your canning jars with your rings on, because this actually can cause a false seal. Well, this canning project is complete. We hope you come back to see us soon on some other gardening and preserving tips that we will have throughout the season. We hope you're having the best day. Thanks for joining us. Bye.